Granger stepped out of the house into the bitter air, his boots sinking into the hard ground. His breath came out in heavy clouds as he moved toward the barn with the same stiff, practiced steps he made every morning. He worked because work was the only thing that kept the ghosts quiet. 3 months had passed since the stampede, 3 months since he had found the wagon overturned and his brother Samuel lying broken in the mud. 3 months since Mary's Sunday dress had been torn across the field like a faded memory. 3 months since the laughter inside the Granger house had died. And now, every morning, the silence inside the walls felt sharper than any winter wind. The chickens clucked weakly when he scattered their feed. He chopped ice from the trough with the heel of his boot, each strike louder than the last. These were chores Samuel used to do, humming some tune under his breath while Mary called the children in for breakfast. Now the only voices came from inside the house, faint and troubled. Little Martha cried on and off, her breath hitching the same way it had the night Eli broke the news. Thomas didn't speak anymore. And Sarah, barely 10, walked around with a brittle determination to keep the house from falling apart, even though her small hands shook when she swept the floor. Eli tried not to listen to their pain. He tried to stay outside as long as the cold would let him, but nothing could keep the memories from crawling back. Samuel's grin. The storm rolling in. The stampede. The overturned wagon. And the way 3 pairs of frightened children looked at him with the horrible understanding that he was all they had left. Inside the house, the fire burned low. The place smelled like old smoke and damp wood. Eli had never learned how to make a home feel warm, and the children suffered for it. The stew he cooked every night was thick and flavorless. The clothes he tried to mend came out crooked. The rooms felt empty, even with all 4 of them in it. They were a broken family, held together by nothing but responsibility. The town didn't help much. Redemption had never liked the Granger name. Folks hadn't forgotten the way Eli's father swung from the cottonwood tree 20 years ago, judged without a trial for a crime he always claimed he didn't commit. Samuel's kindness had softened some of their views, but when he died, so did their sympathy. Eli walked into town only when he had to. People stared at him like they expected him to snap at any moment. They whispered that the children would be better off with another family. He ignored them, but their words stuck like burrs beneath his skin. There was only one place in town where he didn't feel like a wild animal being watched through a fence. Anna Mae Caldwell's bakery. He didn't go inside often, just rode past now and then. But sometimes he saw her through the window, dusted with flour, shaping dough with steady hands. She didn't stare at him like the others. She didn't whisper or turn away. She simply worked, her face calm, her eyes soft with a quiet sadness of their own. She was an outsider, too. Everyone knew her story. A cruel husband, found dead in the snow. A bruise on her cheek she had tried to hide. A sheriff who called it an accident. And a town that never fully believed it. She lived alone in a small room behind the bakery, keeping mostly to herself. Their paths never crossed until the morning she knocked on Eli's door. He was out in the barn forking hay when he heard it. A knock so soft at first he thought it was the wind. Then it came again. He grabbed his axe without thinking and stepped outside. There she was. Anna Mae Caldwell stood on his porch, wrapped in a wool shawl, bits of frost caught in her dark hair. In her hands she held something wrapped in a white cloth. Warm bread. Eli stiffened. Strangers never came this far from town, and certainly not with gifts. He expected pity. He expected judgment. Instead, she simply said, "Mr. Granger, I brought this for the children." Her voice was gentle, steady, no sermon, no sympathy twisted into shame. But Eli didn't trust kindness. He crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "We don't need it." She didn't move, didn't flinch, just held out the warm loaf between them, letting the scent drift toward him. Wheat, butter, a reminder of better days. He was ready to tell her to leave when the door creaked open behind him. Sarah stood there, her blanket wrapped around her narrow shoulders. Thomas peeked from behind her, face pale and hollow, and little Martha, red-eyed from crying, stared at the bread like it was the sun rising for the first time in months. Their eyes weren't on him, they were on her. On the bread. Something cracked in Eli's chest, a soundless break he felt deep in his bones. Pride, anger, fear. None of it mattered when he saw the hunger in their gaze. Hunger for more than food, hunger for hope. "Get inside," he muttered, stepping aside. Anna entered quietly and placed the still warm loaf on the table. She did not linger. She did not try to speak to him or the children. She simply gave a small nod and walked back into the snow, leaving warmth behind her. That night, the children ate in a silence that felt different from the usual kind. Softer, almost peaceful. Eli watched them, wondering why a woman like her would bother with a family like his. 2 days later, he still didn't have an answer. But on the third day, he saw her again, this time carrying a steaming pot. And that was the moment Eli Granger's lonely world began to shift. Anna walked through the snow with careful steps, the wind tugging at her shawl as she crossed the long stretch of field toward the Granger homestead. In her hands she carried a metal pot covered with a clean cloth, steam slipping from beneath it and drifting into the cold air. Eli stood on the porch, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching her approach as if she were a storm rolling toward him. He did not call out to her. He did not step aside. He simply waited. When she reached the porch, her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her breath came out in small clouds. She looked up at him with those calm gray eyes. "I made too much stew," she said. It was a simple sentence, an impossible one. No one made too much, and walked miles through the snow to hand it off at a house the town wished would disappear. Eli knew this, she knew this, but she said nothing more, and somehow that made it harder to refuse. He stepped aside. Inside, the smell filled the room, rich and warm, drifting through the cold corners like a blessing. Beef, carrots, thyme. A reminder of what a real home once smelled like. The children, huddled near the hearth, lifted their heads. Thomas stopped whittling the wooden stick he'd been carving down to dust. Even little Martha's crying softened to a sniffle. Anna ladled the stew into bowls, placing them gently in front of each child. She did not fuss over them or speak in a sweet voice. She simply served them as if this was a normal day, in a normal house. The children ate with a hunger that seemed to lift the weight off their shoulders just a little. When they finished, Anna moved quietly, collecting the empty bowls. Eli expected her to leave right away. Instead, she knelt near the hearth to rinse the dishes in warm water. That was when Martha approached her. The little girl stepped forward slowly, her tangled hair hanging in her face. She touched the hem of Anna's skirt with a small, trembling hand. Anna froze, turning with gentle care, as though afraid to startle her. She knelt down and produced a small comb from her apron pocket. "May I?" she whispered. Martha nodded. Eli watched from the doorway, unable to breathe. Anna sat on the floor and began working through the knots in Martha's hair with soft, patient strokes. She said nothing as she combed, and Martha said nothing either. But the child's shoulders lowered. The trembling stopped. A quiet trust settled between them. In 10 minutes, Anna braided the girl's hair into a neat braid. Martha reached up to touch it, her eyes widening with something faint and forgotten. Childhood. Anna stood, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and left without another word. She came again 2 days later. Then, again, 3 days after that. Each time with something new: apple butter, cornmeal, a few slices of bacon from the butcher. Eli never knew how to respond. He wanted to tell her to stop. He wanted to tell her the town would talk. He wanted to tell her he didn't need her help. But he also wanted her to come back, and she did. Her visits became threads woven through their days. She mended Thomas's shirt. She scrubbed the soot from the hearth. She swept the floor with Sarah's help. She read the children a book in a soft, steady voice that filled the cracks in the house like sunlight sneaking in through broken boards. Eli watched from the edges, the door frame, the barn, the corner of the room. He didn't understand what was happening inside him. He only knew that when she was in the house, the silence didn't feel like it was choking him anymore. Some evenings she stayed a little longer, sitting by the fire after the children went to bed. They didn't talk about their hearts or their hurts. They talked about weather, fences, chores. "It looks like more snow," she would say. "It usually does." Quiet words, safe words. But in the space between them, something warm began to grow, slow and careful, like a seed pushing through the cold earth. The town noticed. Redemption didn't miss much, especially when it involved people they already didn't trust. One morning, in the general store, Mrs. Gable's voice rang through the aisles like a dinner bell. "She's been out to the Granger place 4 times this week," she said loud enough for half the town to hear. "Shameful," another woman agreed. "A widow and a man like him." "Trying to trap him," someone whispered. "That's what it is." They twisted the truth until it turned ugly, as the town always did. They said Anna wanted Eli's land. They said she was sinking her hooks into him. They said she was no better than her husband had been. Anna felt the weight of their stares when she walked through town, the whispers brushing against her like cold wind. She kept her eyes down, her hands folded together, but each word stuck like a thorn. Still, she went back to the Granger house. She went back because she remembered what it felt like to be alone, to be judged, to be hungry in ways that had nothing to do with food. She went back because the children smiled now, because Thomas had whispered his first full sentence to her, because Sarah had begun humming while braiding Martha's hair. She went back because she cared. One afternoon, Eli was splitting wood in the cold yard when he saw her struggling through the snowdrift. He watched her jaw tighten against the wind, her hand gripping her shawl. A sudden sharp worry cut through him. She shouldn't be walking this far. By the next evening, he had decided what to do. When she stood to leave, he said, "Wait." He went to the barn and returned with his spare horse, a gentle old mare. "Take her," he said, holding out the reins. Anna shook her head. "Eli, I can't. She's your only other horse." "You'll get home faster," he said, refusing to take the reins back. "Take her." She hesitated, then accepted. After she left, Eli began building a small shelter near the barn. A place for the mare. A place for Anna should she ever get caught in a storm. He told her it was for the horse. They both knew better. The storm came sooner than he expected. A roaring blizzard swept across the plains, turning the world into a blind, howling white. Eli had just shut the shutters when he heard it. A faint cry outside, nearly swallowed by the wind. He grabbed his coat and lantern, running into the storm. He found her 20 yards from the house, clinging to the mare, her clothes frozen stiff, her body shaking violently. He pulled her close and half-dragged her inside. "You foolish woman," he growled, though fear cracked his voice. "You should have stayed in town." "The children," she whispered, teeth chattering. "I was worried." He wrapped her in blankets as the fire roared brighter. The children peeked out from their beds, their eyes wide with fear and relief. Anna trembled in the firelight, her face pale, her breath weak. Eli sat across from her, watching the rise and fall of her chest, shaken by how close she had come to vanishing into the storm. For the first time, he realized the truth. Her visits were no longer a kindness. They were a part of his life, a part he could no longer imagine losing. When she finally lifted her eyes to his in the glow of the fire, the room felt smaller, warmer, as if the storm outside could no longer touch them. He didn't speak. She didn't either, but the air between them shifted. Something had begun, and neither of them knew where it would lead. Spring settled over the Granger ranch like a soft blanket. The snow melted, the creek began to flow again, and warm sunlight touched the fields that had once looked dead. For the first time in many months, the homestead felt alive. The house smelled of bread and stew instead of silence and sadness. The children were laughing again. And Eli, who had lived so long under the weight of grief, felt something inside him slowly learning to breathe. Anna had changed everything. She had not done it with grand gestures. She had done it with warm bread, gentle hands, and a quiet, steady presence. She had stitched hope back into a house that had fallen apart. She had given the children a sense of safety, something they had not felt since the day they lost their parents. She had become the heart of the home without ever trying to take the place of the mother they lost. But the town did not change as quickly as the season. Some whispers died down, but others grew sharper. A stranger arrived one day, a lawyer from a bigger city, asking questions about her late husband. People watched him with narrowed eyes, but he paid no attention. He asked for old records, talked to old neighbors, and even followed rumors to nearby towns. Days passed before he came back with an answer, and the answer shook the whole town. Jebediah Caldwell had not slipped on ice. He had been killed by two men who had a land argument with him, men who had tried to cover their tracks in a storm. For 2 long years, the town had looked at Anna with suspicion. For 2 long years, she had carried a weight that should never have been hers, and in one afternoon, that weight was lifted. People approached her now, with lowered heads and soft apologies. Some left food on her bakery counter without saying a word. Others simply nodded when she passed by instead of turning away. Redemption was a slow town to change, but it was changing. And the truth had given Anna her name back. When Sheriff Davis brought the official papers to the ranch, Anna listened quietly. She did not cry or ask questions. She only whispered, "Thank you," and sat down at the table with her hands folded. A quiet peace washed over her face, like she had finally been allowed to breathe after years underwater. Days later, Eli walked into town and visited the silversmith. He didn't buy anything fancy. He bought a simple silver band, smooth and plain, because Anna had never needed anything more than honesty. He held on to it for 2 days, waiting for the right moment. That moment came at dusk. Anna was tending to her small garden behind the house, her fingers brushing through the soft soil. Eli walked toward her, his heart pounding like a drum. She looked up, her face lit by the soft orange light of the sunset. He opened his hand. The ring lay in his palm. "I asked you once because I was scared," he said quietly. "But now I'm asking because I love you. I want you to be my wife. Not for the town, not for the judge. For me, for us." Tears filled Anna's eyes, but for the first time, they were not tears of fear or shame. They were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Eli." The wedding was not a large event. They did not stand in front of the town or sit in fancy clothes. They were married beside the creek under a tall cottonwood tree. This was the same tree that held painful memories for Eli. But now, it would hold new ones, better ones. Reverend Miller performed the ceremony with soft words. Sarah held wildflowers she picked that morning. Thomas stood tall beside Eli, trying his best to be strong. Little Martha tugged on Anna's dress, smiling with her small missing-tooth grin. Eli kissed his bride gently, holding her like something precious. When the ceremony ended, the children cheered. For the first time, the ranch did not echo with grief. It echoed with hope. That night, the house glowed warm. The fire crackled. The children were asleep. Eli sat in his chair while Anna rested her head against his knee on the floor. He brushed her hair gently, feeling a happiness so deep it almost hurt. "When I first came here," she whispered, "this house felt cold, like sorrow lived in the walls." She looked up at him, her eyes soft with love. "But you brought this house back to life. You gave these children their smiles again." Eli's throat tightened. He looked at her hand, the hand that once carried warm bread across a snowy field, the hand that had healed his family. "You walked in with bread, Anna," he said, "but you brought us more than warmth." Outside the window, snowflakes began to fall again. Another winter was coming, but this time the house was not cold. It was warm, full of love, full of life. The Granger homestead was no longer a place of loss. It was a home. A home built from kindness, courage, and the simple miracle of a woman who walked across the snow with warm bread and a smile.